We are at the Sarasota Classic Car Museum in Sarasota, Florida. And this is probably, of all the cars that have passed through my hands, I bought this, I think, in about 2008. And this is called the 1937 Goujon Streamliner. It was built by Ronald Goujon, who we've got some history up on the website on Ronald. And we've got quite a bit. In fact, I hope to do a book on this car someday. And we started the restoration years ago, back in 2008, 2009. In fact, if you go to the website, you'll see test drives and so forth. But it was so neat finding the car, because I thought when we started this years ago that we were lucky to find the fiberglass handbuilt cars, little thing pre-war. Well, you know, be careful what you wish for. I found plenty of pre-war cars and more than one teardrop car, and have a couple of teardrop cars. This is one of them. And because of the early find that we did and the history that we did in terms of researching and finding the family, it became one of my favorite cars. One of the things you may notice if you look over to the front axle, if we can see it, is this car is cantilevered. So you actually sit, as I recall, because I haven't driven it for a while, in front of the axle. So it's kind of cool. You're driving the car along, and I would drive the car around in our neighborhood as we were working on it, scaring people. But as we drive along, you come ready for a speed bump. And of course, you feel like you're driving over it, nothing happens, and then it goes up in the air later on, which is kind of fun. This was powered by a 1937 Ford flathead. It came with a 34 Ford flathead in transmission, but we upgraded that to a 37. 34 Ford flatheads are great. They're poured bearings, a little harder to maintain. And so we upgraded to a 37 along with the transmission, which is side shifting, because originally one of the reasons we could verify it's 1937, since it was built in 37 in the late, it was built and then restyled a little bit by the Ronald Goujon. But the transmission was a top loader, meaning right on the top, which is great. And there's still pulleys at the very top of the inside, because the ropes used to go up and it would pull over here. So you'd pull this rope and you pull another one, you could shift it. Well, a side shifting transmission came out in 1940. And so we decided to upgrade it because that allowed us to do what are called Heim joints and belt cranks. And we could actually put a floor shifter in, which operates normally. Very interesting design. It could have been done back in the day, but we did that to make it drivable. I don't want to drive a car with pulling chains like I'm pulling a train horn at all. And I didn't want anyone to be able to do that either. So we rebuilt the front end and we re-strengthened the floor, and we actually did make it much more drivable. And the 1937 engine is regular machine bearings, so you can maintain that a little bit better. And then we put in a nice big radiator. The radiator had been in the front. We moved it to the back and built a bulkhead in the back so that air can be brought in through these large holes. These large holes were vents back in the day, and they may still be when the car is restored. We started about halfway done with, no, third of the way done with it. But you can see the radiator, gigantic radiator here we put in. And then we built a bulkhead so that all the air can go through the radiator into the engine compartment. And we have another bulkhead that we haven't built yet. There used to be a chamber like a Chris Craft motorboat around the engine itself. I don't know if you can see you can see the engine. So it used to be kind of, and we still have a cover that fit over it and over the radiator. But by moving everything back and then building a second bulkhead here, we can actually bring the air cycle where air would come through and then out through the floor inside here. Same design, because the air did come through here before, but it was actually pulled way to the front of the engine. It came through the front radiator. Now we're pulling it through the back, and that's all built to this point too. Had to put in the world's shortest drive shaft. We were updating it. You can't see it right now. I think it's 6 inches. World's shortest drive shaft. And then we did the exhaust system too. And there's some nice things about the car. It's all aluminum. It was all aluminum. It was done by, a artist and stylist who learned how to do buck riveting, the flush riveting. And, like any hand-built car back in the day, this was not done by a car manufacturer. It was done by an individual, inspired by a cover of the Motor Annual magazine, a red teardrop car, which actually was based on, not Gilbert, W something. It was a guy who did the Arrowhead teardrop car. And his name escapes me. I was friends with the family. I think the last son has passed away since. But that car was on the cover stylized, and that car was the basis for this design. 1937 is much bigger than the Arrowhead teardrop car. You can actually take people in the car. Kind of amazing, these cars, aluminum teardrop cars, most of them were aluminum back in the day, not all of them. Any of these teardrop cars from the 1930s, it's amazing they survived, because what happened in 1941 in America? 1941 in America was Pearl Harbor in the beginning of World War II. And the scrap drives claimed Duesenbergs. The scrap drives claimed anything that could help the war effort in getting bombs and machinery and so forth built. And anything aluminum, that was the new material. In the 1950s, the new material was fiberglass. In the 1930s, the new material was aluminum. and anything aluminum, oh my God, to the front of the scrap line. Absolutely amazing this car survived. So kudos to the Goujon family. And Ronald, who passed away in the early 60s, he kept it all his life and was updating it here or there. And we've made some of the retrofits back to what it looked like in the 1930s. Wraparound windshield, plastic. We put this one in. It was plastic remnants one here. How could it be plastic? Well, if you look at the gigantic dirigibles, the Zeppelins of the era, they weren't glass. They used a plastic also. And you can actually see that. A plastic that you could warp and turn and so forth. So it's not pressurized, but you're not going to be breaking any speed records right now either. And certainly when the car is restored, we'll end up doing a thicker kind of Lexan. And it's a fairly easy thing to make. I think we did this in 2 panels. Yeah, we did this in 2 panels. And we'll do that again with the new piece here. Always like the headlights. Headlights originally were actually covered glass. We've got pictures of it, black glass. Much better to have a kind of taper like an early post-war Lincoln Cosmopolitan, which would be from, have a nice tapered kind of look. We did that on our Maverick when Tom Chandler restored the Maverick that we owned. And we actually built an aluminum or fiberglass in that case tube and then created specifically to the curvature of the Maverick. And that's what we would do here too. We put the floors back in. I don't even know. Does this come on? You can open the door. Look at this great thing here. If you go ahead and look at the video, I'm sorry, the seats, you'll see you can get in. And what we want to do is build sliders so the seats can slide left and right. Not too worried about back and forward. The left and right allows you access so the person in the back can struggle to get in. And down this side is open. On that side, back there, we built a custom tailored aluminum gas tank. So on this side and that side, I always wanted to put in like the post-war Munces, ice boxes. So we could build them. Certainly we could build it. It'd been original, but it'd be kind of fun. Doors have to be redone too and all. This car was also built with a belly tank. Belly pan. So on the bottom is all the structure so that you can actually put aluminum down. And actually you can see it down here. Some of it over here. If you bring in the camera and you look down, you'll see some of the structure still in place. And all of those pans need to be put back in because this was just like a fuselage of an airplane, completely enclosed. Had a full dashboard. It originally was done in red leather from the Packard plant, as I remember the family telling me. Ronald Goujon was from Bay City, Saginaw, in that area. You can consult the website to see exactly. And his whole family is up there. His nephews, cousins. Meade was one of them, and Joel was another. And they formed in the 60s the West Systems Epoxy Corporation, which specialized in the restoration of fiberglass boats. It was kind of interesting because initially, if you come up here and take a look, you'll see all these different layers of aluminum. Well, this was all covered with a very thin covering of plastic. Very, very early for the day. And the Goujon family was fascinated with the kind of plastic and took samples back to see. And that allowed him to have kind of normal skills. I mean, everything was fine and worked well. But you want to see this all smooth. And in fact, we've got pictures of it when it was all smooth. And it was coated with a plastic, some kind of plastic fiberglass material, which was kind of interesting. It's got a fin in the back, which I always thought was kind of cool. And it has a more modern post-war vanes in there from, I believe, a Mercury. It still looks nice, but that was one of the later updates he did. He was still working on it off and on. It had been finished, and just like any finished car, custom cars in the 50s, if you finish the car, the next year you start it over again. If you didn't build something brand new, you made changes to what you had. So we've been bringing those back to the 1930s changes at this point. Oh, let's see, what else? The starter button is still in there. So I remember we found it. Someone found it for me. I think it's on this side. Still here somewhere. Maybe it's on the other side. No, can't find it there. I'm sorry? Well, ignition, I think we put in, I think there was a button in here somewhere. This is a Chrysler Airflow or DeSoto Airflow steering wheel. So that kind of made it look Art Deco. Kind of cool. The wheels are wide 5 Fords from 35 to 39. They allow stronger, the 5-bolt pattern is on the perimeter of the center of the wheel. And I think we've got hubcaps on it now, don't we? Yeah, hubcaps, so you can't see that, but they're wide 5 wheels. Brakes originally were mechanical, and then we upgraded them to hydraulic. As I remember, it's been a long time now. I think they're hydraulic or ready to become hydraulic, one of the two. Wheelbase is kind of neat in that it's straight back here, and well, you've got it's an unaltered wheelbase from 1934. And so all the length was added to the front. And you'll see, if you tear it all apart, you'll actually see the floor is flat up to where it would have been, I think, covering the engine area, and then an extra frame was built just like our Moon Transporter out in the front of it. Aluminum, fender skirts, all that will be returned. We'll just see flush mounted ones. Sorry? Yeah. Yeah. There were some nice refinements and some things that were done the best he could do back in the day. These seats were in the style, they're actually from the Chicagoan, 1954, but I liked them and how the look they gave to it, and they fit in there. So if we either use these seats, or if we actually use something like that, Art Deco seats, whichever, the two things of Art Deco, you have Art Deco wild flourishes in design and simple minimalistic kind of style, and they coexisted back at the same time, and this would have been the simple kind of design. If we carry forward the restoration, these door handles will disappear, and the best flush door mounts from the 40s would be the Lincoln Zephyr, the push buttons, which are really nice. I like those. No turn signals.
How old was he when he built it?
How old was he? Most of these guys are in their 20s or early 30s. So right, late 20s, early 30s, somewhere in that range.
I recall there was wasn't there a funny anecdotal story that somebody you met that had gone for a ride in it? It was kind of like crazy.
Well, I've done some interviews. I recorded that one. There's a lot of people. I met the person. It's a very small town, and the house, he built the house from scratch. We've got pictures online of the house he designed and built, and then the house burned down. So everything, he built his own house, he built his own cars. And the young guy next door would come over, and that's where we got additional information about what he was looking at when he was designing it and so forth. It was kind of cool. And we've done digital interviews. All the audio recording is available. And then next door was a woman and a young girl, and she just started college, her first year in college. But I guess they lived together, or lived not together, they lived next to one another, next door neighbors for a long time. And so she knew him, and she was going to college for the first time, like Ann Arbor or somewhere. And again, I did the audio interviews, so they're all saved. So 20, 30, 40 miles away, and this would have been late 40s, and he was making more changes, and there was no floor at the time. So he said, well, I'll take you and I'll drop you off at school. This is like 1946 or 47. And so she said, absolutely. You know, people are adventurous back then. Youngsters, you know, younger people and teenagers even more so. So she remembers riding to college from where he lived for 20 or 30 miles, and she was bracing herself in the seat and then keeping her legs on her feet on top of the cross members, which were there as the floor was speeding by, and she was holding on for dear life as he was racing through it. Can you imagine 1947, 48, 46, going to college and being delivered in this? I think it's pretty cool. So where's the bumper? It had bumpers. I have the bumpers, actually, and they were done very crudely. Remember, this was a designer. He did a fantastic job for what he could at the time. But the best cars, the best teardrop cars, the most interesting cars, we've done this before on our Maverick, use blade bumpers. And blade bumpers are what's designed for this car at this point, which is our two parallel surfaces that go across the shape of the car. You can look at the Phantom Corsair that has blade bumpers, the Airhead teardrop car had blade bumpers, the 1940s Faisal Supersonic had blade bumpers, and 1934 Cadillac, 1934 LaSalle had, I think they're called biplane or airplane bumpers, but again, they were two parallel kinds of pieces of metal bumpers. On the Cadillac LaSalle were more refined and more bumper-like, but again, it was two parallel. But my favorite one is the Phantom Corsair. Look at the Phantom Corsair. That's what this is. We'll eventually have on it. Phantom Corsair blade bumpers, which were on the show cars and concept cars of its day. I grew up through age 7 in Carbondale, Illinois. And my mom's professor was Buckminster Fuller, Bucky Fuller. And I've got great stories of her in the class and what Bucky Fuller was like, the famous designer of the Fuller house, Dymaxion car, was a teardrop kind of shaped car, fuselage car. And how could I not like the Dymaxions as a kid? I mean, I loved old cars. I loved cars since I was 4 or 5. And so I would hear stories from her. I know that I met him, but I was too young to have any of those memories. But I knew about the Citroen she would describe, and my father described the Citroen that he had. It was the famous streamlined-looking one that had a hydraulic suspension. It would go right down to the ground, and he would make fun of it in that way and so forth. So they all had, my parents actually helped them build the geodesic films that I think are being restored now, are restored in Carbondale, Illinois. All the kids did, and the college kids did back in the 60s, helped out their professor. So I always liked teardrop cars, but where do you find them? I wouldn't even look, which is bizarre since I found several now. So my friends who are in this together and share interest in all these hand-built cars, one of them was telling me, oh yeah, I saw one of those teardrop cars on, it was on eBay. Yeah, it was on eBay that you liked. I'm like, what? Because they don't come available. I hadn't found any at that point. I hadn't really started looking. And so he goes, no, it was on their eBay. I don't think it sold. And it was out there by you. I said, well, by me? So I do the research. It's on eBay. The sale was over. I forgot what it was a bit up to. And I'm like, well, this is crazy. And I tracked down, I'm friends with the family to this day, Felskis. So I tracked down the people. I sent them a message, hey, I'd be interested in your car, talking to you about it at least. Can I know a little bit more about it? And I was in Newport Richie, and I am in Tampa. And so we put together, I went up and looked at it, and we talked about it a long time. I put together a deal, and I have all the video of picking it up. We actually had to, it was in mid-restoration. Sadly, her husband had passed away. It was in mid-restoration, and we had to design iron bars and wheels and all to kind of move the front of it. So what we did was got it all set, went up there one day, and then came back the next day and loaded it all up. But it was on eBay. It hadn't sold. And I've got the coolest kinds of, I've saved all the original documentation off eBay, and also of a sales flyer. They were going around in Tampa, Florida with a sales flyer, Streamliner for sale, and little tiny phone numbers that you could clip off, and you just take one and so forth. So we have all that too, which I think is kind of cute. So we found it. And of course, the first one led to a second one. The second one led to more. I stopped buying them. I found enough of them. I think at that point I started building the belly tank with Bill Burke and taking that in 2009 to Bonneville and then NHR Museum and so forth. So how can you not like teardrop cars? The one thing about teardrop cars they haven't shared, and the most important piece is, many of us think of the 1938 Project Y, which is a Buick concept car, as America's first concept cars. Well, teardrop cars predated that by 10, 15, 20 years even. There were teardrop cars back in the aughts, 1900 something. There were teardrop cars in the 20, and this is from 37. The Dymaxions were before them. The Aero had teardrop car about the same time. America's first concept cars, America's first, not show cars, but concept cars. This wasn't a grocery getter. This was a concept car. Like, the fast car, the shape of the teardrop. This was before they learned that the camback was actually better aerodynamic than just the teardrop. But this actually happens to be based on one of the most famous teardrop designs. And what he did was, when he actually focused on the design of the car, whenever you focus on design or form, you sacrifice function. If you look at function, then you sacrifice design. So the function of modern cars are fantastic. Who doesn't love a modern car? They're perfect, and they all look the same to me. Virtually all the same, one big jelly bean. Beautiful jelly beans. Every car here was focused on design, form. And so form drove it. So you have a wonderful looking car in the shape of a teardrop, which is absolutely difficult to get into. And I'll open this up again. Impossible if you want to go to the back seat. So it better be for kids only. If I got in the back seat, I think I'd be here overnight. I don't know how you get me out. Side windows were plexiglass back here. And very much like an airplane, you could unscrew, pop them on the inside. I can't imagine ever putting them in. When restoration would be, we'd have them designed again. But for any kind of driving purposes, there's no air conditioning, so I imagine we leave the side windows out. But generally, they've got drilled holes. Put them in like an airplane, screw them down, and you're done. So that's my story, how I found it. Found it through a friend, Eric Schultz, on eBay, and then developed a relationship with the people. And what you're looking at is one of the few surviving examples of America's first concept cars.